The year is now 1651, and the British are mad at the colonists for trading their goods away. So the British passed taxes onto the colonists to hold them accountable and to make sure that they were buying only British goods for more expensive prices. The colonists then boycott this tax called the Navigation Acts by simply not buying any British goods that are imported to the New World. It is the early to mid-18th century, and there is a period of what is referred to as salutary neglect underway in the colonies. During this time period, Britain paid less attention to the colonies and instead focused more on their problems at home. This meant that parliamentary laws, meant to keep the colonies obedient, were less enforced during this time, which enabled the colonies to start practicing forms of self-government and therefore become more independent. Later on, when Britain retracted this period of salutary neglect, the colonists felt as their rights and freedoms that had developed during this time were being restrained, which led to anger and protest. This anger expanded into thoughts of rebellion against the British. Ongoing at this time was the practice of mercantilism. Mercantilism is the idea that in order for an empire to be successful, they must export more than they import, and Britain followed this idea. The colonies were perfect for exercising mercantilism because they would supply raw materials to Britain, and then Britain would send back finished goods for the colonies to purchase. At the same time, the colonies were only allowed to sell to and purchase from the British, which maximized British profit. While mercantilism had some positive implications for the colonies, including British bounties for colonial producers, colonial monopoly in Britain, and free military protection, mercantilism also stifled colonial economic initiative and made the colonies dependent on Britain. This system, which made the colonies reliant on Britain, did not go over well with the independently minded colonists. Otherwise known as the 7 Years' War, this was a war fought between the French and the British, with the Native Americans aiding the French and the colonists aiding the British. The British eventually won, but due to how long the war lasted, Britain fell largely in debt. Therefore, taxes were placed on the colonists after the war to help Britain restructure their finances. These taxes made the colonists very angry and therefore contributed to the revolution. It is late in the year 1763, and the British have just won the 7 Years' War, and the colonists are anxious to explore the Ohio River Valley. They signed a document proclaiming that the colonists can share the land with the Native Americans. This helped lead to the revolution by creating tensions between the Native Americans and the colonists.
It is now 1764, 1 year after the Proclamation Line was implemented. The British wanted the colonists to pay them back for protecting them during the French and Indian War. The British were also in a lot of debt and didn't have the money to repay the cost of war or to keep up with their massive amount of territory that they inherited from the war. In order to get money, the British passed taxes on the colonists for imported goods, mainly sugar. The colonists resented the British for making them pay more money when they had no representation in government.
It is the year 1765, and the Stamp Act has just been passed after the passing of the Sugar Act and the Quartering Act. Much like the preceding acts, the Stamp Act was passed in order for the British to raise the money necessary to pay back their debts from the French and Indian War. This act essentially called for a tax on all paper goods, including marriage licenses, newspapers, and playing cards, etc. This was the first direct tax in the colonies, where the colonists could actually see the tax they were being forced to pay and weren't just handed goods with the tax already included in the price. Therefore, this angered the colonists and added fuel to the fire of resentment against the British and the colonies.
The year is 1767, and the British are still in debt from war. They look to taxes yet again to steer colonists away from purchasing imported goods and to instead purchase the products that the British manufactured. They placed taxes on all imported luxury items such as sugar, glass, lead, paint, and tea. The British also created the writs of assistance during this time. This gave British the right to search anyone and their property at any time, to catch people for smuggling. The Vice Admiralty courts were established so that if colonists were caught for smuggling, then they'd be tried in a British court, giving the British the advantage. This angered colonists since they felt like they were being ganged up on and that their rights were being taken away. We are now in the year 1773. The Townshend Acts had all been repealed except for tea, and the colonists were fed up with paying taxes. The cost of the tea was relatively low, but the colonists still felt like their rights were being limited since they weren't allowed to buy tea from any company other than the British East India Company. At the time, this was the only tax that still remained, and colonists weren't having it. They dressed up as Indians, seized a ship, and threw all of the tea into the harbor that was entering Boston. For the British, this was the last straw. Shortly after the event, the Intolerable Acts were passed. These acts included shutting down the Boston Harbor, prohibiting town meetings in Massachusetts, and the implementation of the new Quartering Act. In 1774, Parliament passed the new Quartering Act. This forced colonists to house and provide food for soldiers if they were to knock on their doors. This was caused by lack of housing for soldiers in the colonies. The Quartering Act caused colonists to be angered by the random stranger in their house who was eating up all of their food.
Benjamin Franklin was one of the founding fathers of the United States. He was instrumental in the creation of colonial unity, which he inspired in part through his Join or Die cartoon. The cartoon presented the idea that if the colonies didn't join together against their common enemy, they would all fall. Ben Franklin was also one of the first United States ambassadors to the French, and he represented America in several diplomatic instances. These included the French-American Alliance in 1778 and the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Overall, he contributed to the American Revolution by insinuating colonial unity and speaking on behalf of the United States in diplomatic situations concerning the Revolution. One of the founding fathers, and known especially well as the mastermind behind the Boston Tea Party, he was very influential in American history and impacted the Revolution. Sam Adams helped lead revolts across the country and got the colonists as rich to the British as he was. Therefore, he was a very guiding character on the road to revolution.